Welcome, dear listener, to the Sleeping Hourglass. This evening's journey will take us to the final dawn of Admiral Yi Sun-sin. Korea's steadfast guardian of the waves, his was not a story of easy triumph. He was betrayed, wounded, and burdened, yet he rose again and again, not for glory, but for the survival of his people. Tonight, we pause at the Strait of Noryang, where the sea bowed its head in reverence and a man's last breath became a nation's memory. And if, along the way, you find comfort here, perhaps consider subscribing or leaving a small gesture of support, not as an obligation, but as a way to help keep this peaceful harbour alive, a place you can always return to when the world feels too loud. Its sea breathes before we do. Its tides move with a rhythm older than memory, older than language, older even than the names we give to shorelines. Before there were kings to write decrees or soldiers to march in battle, there was the sea, restless, unyielding, eternal. It rises and falls with patient silence, as though it keeps a diary in waves, each entry erased and rewritten, but never truly forgotten. When we look upon the ocean, we see only the surface, rippling, glittering, breaking in soft foam, but beneath there lies an archive of human longing. Oars dipped into these waters centuries ago, sails caught winds that once rushed over these very waves, voices shouted into mist, drums pounded against fog, and yet the sea absorbed them all, carrying their echoes into the marrow of its being. It is the sea that remembers before we do, long before the name of Yi Sun-sin was whispered across Korea, before the word admiral carried weight in the mouths of sailors. The waters of the southern coast of the peninsula were already cradling stories. They had felt the burn of fire ships, the tumble of wreckage, the scattering of men who sought refuge upon their surface. And still, with each tide, the sea returned to calm, as if to say that it would outlast all empires, all wars, all brief flickers of human power. Yet within its patience, the sea holds memory not as stone does, but as breath does, subtle, vanishing, yet never entirely gone. To listen is to hear its hum, a soft dirge that stretches across centuries. Tonight, we begin not with the clash of steel or the thunder of cannon, but with that hum. We stand on the edge of Noryang Strait. In the quiet before dawn, the sky still wears the indigo of night, and the waters reflect it like polished glass. Lanterns from fishing boats flicker far away, but here, in the wide silence, there is nothing but the sound of the tide pulling against the rocks. Close your eyes and imagine this place. The air smells of salt and cold. The mist presses against your skin, dampening your hair, clinging to your lashes. The horizon is only a shadow, barely visible, and beneath your feet the water stirs, slow, patient, endless. This is the sea as Yi Sun-sin knew it, vast and indifferent, yet also intimate, like a confidant who listens without ever speaking back. To him, the ocean was not only battlefield but companion, not only stage of death but cradle of life. He read its movements as one reads the shifting lines of a face, searching for truth, for warning, for what was to come. And the sea remembers. It remembers the years of fire that scorched the peninsula, when Japanese ships prowled like wolves across the straits. It remembers the voices of fishermen turned sailors, their hands blistered from pulling oars, their backs bent under the weight of survival. It remembers the sudden thunder of turtle ships, those armoured beasts of wood and iron, slicing through the water with defiance. It remembers, too, the prayers whispered into the wind, the desperate pleas of mothers on shore, the steady resolve of commanders who knew they might not see another dawn. The sea gathers all of this, holding it not in ink or stone, but in rhythm, in tide, in the ceaseless pull of its waves. And it waits, for though the war has raged for 7 long years, and though blood has mingled with salt more times than can be counted, the sea does not forget who walks its edge, who commands its currents. It knows the weight of Yi Sun-sin's gaze, the firm hand that steadies a fleet, the voice that carries across the water like iron wrapped in calm. But tonight, it knows something else. It knows that a dawn is coming, a dawn unlike any before. The stars begin to fade. A line of silver touches the horizon, trembling softly. The tide lifts, as though inhaling deeply before the storm. Somewhere in the distance, a lantern bobs on a deck, swaying with the roll of the current. Soon, those decks will quake with the pounding of feet, the thunder of cannon, the cries of men. But not yet. Not in this hour of silence. Now, the sea holds still. It whispers of what is to come, though no one yet listens. It gathers its strength, as though ready to bear once more the burden of human fury. It knows that dawn will not break with birdsong, but with drums. It knows that history itself waits on this horizon, suspended between darkness and light. Yi Sun-sin does not yet step onto the stage of his final dawn. He rests in the half-light, perhaps gazing upon the same waters, feeling the same cold mist upon his skin. Perhaps he, too, hears the sea's hum, the low and endless song that speaks of memory and fate. And as we drift here, in this quiet moment before thunder, we sense the weight of that memory pressing gently upon us. The sea remembers before we do. It cradles the stories we have not yet told. It prepares the ground upon which courage will stand, and it waits for us to listen. For when the dawn breaks, when the drums thunder and the battle ignites, it will not be the beginning. It will be a continuation of what the sea has already kept, already known. The ocean does not forget. And so, as the first light stirs the horizon, and as the mist trembles with the promise of noise, we step into the story the sea has guarded for centuries. The final dawn of Admiral Yi Sun-sin is about to rise, not from silence, but from memory. The sea holds its breath, as though waiting for history to speak. The war itself will step forward, the Imjin conflict burning across a weary land, pressing its shadow toward the strait where destiny waits. War does not begin with thunder. It begins with footsteps. In 1592, the ground of Korea trembles with the weight of armies crossing its southern shores. The Japanese arrive like a tide of steel, intent on piercing through the peninsula and pushing beyond, toward China. The invasion is sudden, vast, and merciless. Villages that once heard only the sound of farming tools and children's laughter now echo with the clash of blades, the crackle of fire, the wailing of the displaced. The peninsula burns. Imagine a farmer standing in his field at dawn. His hands are rough with labor, his back bent with years of harvest. Suddenly, the sky fills with smoke and soldiers march through, trampling grain, cutting down what they cannot carry. His home is reduced to ash in a matter of hours. His family flees to the hills, clutching one another as the world they knew dissolves into ruin. For him, the war is not strategy or politics. It is hunger, loss, and the sound of footsteps retreating into the mountains. From the royal court in Hainyang to the humblest thatched roofs, the war presses upon every soul. The Japanese advance with terrifying speed, armed with muskets and discipline, cutting through defenses like a blade through silk. The Korean army falters, retreating again and again, their weapons no match for the flood that surges inland. Even the royal court scatters, the king himself forced to abandon his capital and wander north in exile, his throne left vulnerable in the smoke of conquest. The people are caught in the firestorm. Some flee into forests, living on roots and bark. Others hide in caves, whispering prayers into the dark. Families fracture. Children separated from parents, brothers lost to the sword, sisters carried into captivity. War is not distant. It enters every home, it steals every breath, it demands a price from even those who never set foot on a battlefield. And yet, even in the midst of devastation, the land resists. Peasant militias form, righteous armies, ordinary men and women who take up old swords, farming tools, or even bare fists to defend their homes. They fight in valleys and forests, striking swiftly before melting back into the hills. Though small in number, their courage begins to kindle hope that a people who refuse to vanish cannot truly be conquered. Still, the greatest hope lies not on land, but upon the sea. The coastline of Korea stretches long and jagged, a lacework of inlets, straits and islands. It is here that survival finds its pulse. Supplies for the invading army must travel by water, for the roads are rough and the distances vast. And it is here that Korea's chance of resistance glimmers. The seas, if defended, could starve the invaders. The seas, if lost, would feed them endlessly. The waves, once mirrors of calm, now churn with urgency. Fishing boats become scouts. Merchants' vessels become carriers of weapons. Harbours transform into battlegrounds, and from the water's edge rises the figure who will shape destiny, Admiral Yi Sun-sin, not yet immortal, not yet legend, but already watchful, already steady, already preparing to turn the tide. But before his fleet could gather, the peninsula groans beneath suffering. Fires rage through homes, palaces, temples. Sacred texts and records vanish in smoke. Fields once heavy with rice stand blackened. The winter cold bites deeper, because granaries have been emptied, livestock stolen, and villages abandoned. For common families, the war is measured not in victories or defeats, but in bowls of rice gone missing, in footsteps taken farther from home, in the silence of loved ones who do not return. Mothers cradle children under pine trees, singing lullabies even as their own stomachs ache with hunger. Old men cling to ancestral land, refusing to flee, only to face the sharp edge of an enemy blade. Young men are conscripted, some willingly, others with dread, pulled from ploughs and fields into the chaos of armies. The peninsula, once humming with the rhythm of ordinary life, is reduced to the raw pulse of survival. The war burns, and it does not stop. Years pass. The invaders entrench themselves, fortresses rising in captured cities. Battles ebb and flow. Allies are called. Ming China sends armies across the Yalu, joining Korea in its desperate resistance. Yet alliances bring not only strength but tension. Misunderstandings, mistrust, and cultural divides surface, even as both sides bleed together against the Japanese tide. Still, necessity binds them. The peninsula becomes a chessboard of nations, but the people live in the spaces between moves. Their suffering is not tallied in strategy meetings or painted on war maps. It is in the hollow eyes of refugees, in the ash-stained clothes of wanderers, in the fields gone barren for lack of hands to till them. And through it all, the seas carry the weight. Supplies flow like blood through arteries, vital to the invaders. If those arteries are cut, the enemy weakens. If they remain open, the war drags on. The fate of a nation, perhaps of nations, rests not in fortresses or palaces, but on the restless, patient waters. The war that burned the peninsula does more than scorch earth, it reshapes identity. Out of fire, a deeper resolve emerges. The people endure because they must. Their songs change, their prayers deepen, their courage grows. Each family that survives becomes a quiet act of resistance. Each village that rebuilds whispers to the invader, "You may burn us, but you cannot erase us." And in this crucible, Admiral Yi rises. His name becomes more than an officer's title. It becomes the axis upon which hope turns. For though armies falter on land, though the king wanders displaced, the seas have yet to yield. And where the seas hold, so too does the spirit of a nation. The war burns still, the peninsula scarred, the people weary. Yet in their weariness, they look to the horizon, to the waves where lanterns of ships glow faintly in the night. They look to the waters, waiting for the figure who will guard them, who will not falter, who will carve victory out of ruin. And so the land, battered and smoking, leans upon the sea. It is here, upon the restless waters, that salvation waits. The peninsula smoulders in ruin, yet the waves glimmer with possibility. From ashes and betrayal, an admiral will rise. Yi Sun-sin, a man forged in the very fire that sought to break him. Greatness is not born in ease. It is shaped in fire, hammered upon the anvil of loss. For Yi Sun-sin, the path to legend is not a steady ascent, but a stumbling, brutal road, one littered with betrayals, humiliations, and chains. To understand the admiral who will one day command the seas with unflinching calm, we must first walk with him through the darkness where hope seems lost. The Imjin War has already scarred Korea, yet even in the midst of fire, politics coils like a serpent. Rivalries among generals fester. Court officials bicker, suspicious of one another, more fearful of ambition than of the invaders storming their land. In such a climate, Yi's brilliance is both his strength and his curse, his victories at sea, his precision, his incorruptible honesty. These inspire loyalty among sailors, but jealousy among those who wield power from afar. And so betrayal comes not from the enemy across the waves, but from within his own nation. Yi is accused of insubordination. Whispers spread in court, painting him as disobedient, arrogant, even dangerous. Political rivals exploit his integrity, twisting it into stubbornness, his caution into cowardice, his victories into threats to their own influence. The king, fragile in his authority and fearful of disloyalty, listens. Stripped of command, Yi is seized. His armor, once a symbol of safety to his men, is torn from him. Shackles bite into his wrists. He is dragged through the streets not as a savior, but as a criminal. The sailors who had once looked to him with reverence now stand in stunned silence, unable to intervene. They see their admiral beaten, humiliated, cast into the shadows of disgrace. The prison walls close in. He is tortured, beaten until flesh tears, until pain becomes a constant companion. Each lash of punishment is meant not only to wound the body, but to crush the spirit. Yet he endures. He does not cry out. He does not plead for mercy. He carries his suffering in silence, as though the weight of chains is but another duty, another burden to shoulder for the sake of his people. Imagine him in the cold darkness of confinement. His body aches, his future is uncertain, his reputation smeared. He has every reason to surrender to despair, and yet, deep within, he guards a quiet flame, the conviction that truth endures beyond slander, that duty matters more than recognition. That service to his people cannot be erased by the malice of rivals. This is the crucible in which he is forged. When at last he is released, he does not return to bitterness. He does not seek revenge upon those who wronged him. Instead, he returns to the sea, to the rhythm of tides, to the place where his purpose is clearest. Though his rank is diminished, though his name carries the scar of disgrace, he takes command once more, ready to rebuild with patience. He knows that resentment would only weaken him. Duty, not pride, guides his hand. The people, however, do not forget. To them, he remains more than an official title. Fishermen whisper of his courage. Soldiers remember his calm voice in battle. Refugees speak his name with reverence, for they know who truly guards their coast. Even as court politics bruise him, the heart of the nation beats with his name. In time, the truth becomes undeniable. The war demands leaders who will not waver, and he alone has shown the strength to face the tide. He is restored to full command. The man who once wore chains now wears armor again, not polished with pride, but weathered by humility. His scars, both seen and unseen, do not weaken him, they harden him into steel that no storm can shatter. It is in these defeats that Yi's greatness takes root. For had he only known victory, he might have become proud, careless, or blind to the fragility of fortune. But because he has known disgrace, he learns compassion. Because he has known betrayal, he learns vigilance. Because he has known pain, he learns endurance. He does not lead with arrogance, but with patience. He does not pursue glory, but survival for his people. He knows how swiftly honor can be taken, and so he builds his legacy not on titles but on unshakable duty. His command is not a privilege, it is a vow. History often remembers the thunder of battles, the blaze of triumphs. But here, in the quiet corridors of defeat, Yi Sun-sin is truly formed. His chains become the mold of his integrity. His scars become the ink with which his story is written, and though his enemies meant to break him, they instead gave him the strength to carry burdens heavier than any other could endure. When he returns to the deck of a ship, his sailors see not just a commander, but a man who has walked through fire and returned unburned in spirit. They see a leader who cannot be shaken by politics, who cannot be bent by jealousy, who cannot be silenced by pain. His calm is no longer the calm of ignorance. It is the calm of one who has faced despair and chosen to rise. The admiral who will one day meet his last dawn at Noryang is not defined by the battles he wins, but by the defeats he survives. Each humiliation, each scar, each betrayal, these carve him into the shape of a man who will never abandon his post, never surrender his people, never let the sea fall silent. And so we linger on this truth: defeat is not the end. It is a shaping, a tempering, a necessary shadow through which light grows brighter. Yi Sun-sin emerges from his prison not broken, but refined. His spirit, tested and tried, will carry him through storms yet to come. In the silence after defeat, a new strength is born, and as the war drags on, that strength will soon be tested against the looming shadow of Noryang, the place where destiny waits upon the waters. The war has stretched across years, like a winter that refuses to end. Korea's land bleeds, its villages smolder, its people wander in hunger. The Japanese still linger on the peninsula, their ships still prowl the southern waters, and though the tide of the conflict is turning, it is not yet done. Within this restless storm stands Yi Sun-sin, an admiral who longs for nothing more than stillness, yet who cannot close his eyes to the sea. Exhaustion lies heavy upon him. He has fought battle after battle, storm after storm, not only against the enemy's fleets, but against the suspicions of kings and courtiers. He has known chains, torture, disgrace. He has seen comrades executed on false charges and allies falter under intrigue. He has been dismissed, restored, dismissed again, each time enduring the cruel weight of politics. Yet each time he returns to the water, as though drawn by a force greater than his own desire. At night, when the lantern burns low in his cabin, he bends over parchment. His brush moves slowly, his words deliberate. What he writes is not meant for applause, not meant for the court, not even meant for his descendants. They are the quiet murmurs of a soul that cannot speak its weariness aloud. His diary, the Nanjung Ilji, carries more than strategy. It carries breath, fatigue, and a steadfastness that seems almost beyond the strength of one man. He writes of hunger, of the lack of rice for his sailors. He writes of weather, the shifting winds and stubborn tides that dictate whether ships may sail or remain still. He writes of his fear, not of death, but of failure, of leaving his people unprotected. He does not adorn these entries with grandeur. There are no lofty speeches, no embellishments of heroism. Instead, there is the plain, steady rhythm of a man who endures. The admiral longs for rest, yet rest does not come. In his heart, he aches to return to a simple life, perhaps to walk once more among fields, to hear the laughter of children, to let his hands grow calloused not from ropes and iron but from the handle of a plough. Yet every dawn finds him again on the deck, his eyes fixed upon the horizon. He is not a man of peace in this moment of history. He is the wall against the tide, and he cannot step away without letting it break. His men see this, though he never speaks of it aloud. They see the way his shoulders bear the invisible weight of the kingdom. They see the hollows beneath his eyes, carved deeper with each passing season. They see the care with which he inspects every ship, every rope, every cannon, as though the very survival of his nation depends upon such small details. And in truth, it does, for the Japanese fleets are larger, richer, more numerous. Only discipline, precision, and the unbreakable will of their admiral hold the balance. Sometimes his diary shifts into prayer. Quiet lines, not to the court, not to history, but to heaven itself. He pleads for strength, for mercy upon the suffering people, for the war to end. He asks not for victory, not for glory, but for a dawn that does not rise upon smoke and broken hulls. His words echo with a humility that history often forgets. He is remembered as a giant of strategy, a hero of Korea, yet in his own ink he is merely a servant, tired, human, and yearning for stillness. But rest is a luxury that war denies. The Japanese remain determined to withdraw not in peace, but in thunder. The Ming allies, though powerful, are uneasy and divided. Tension stretches across the seas like a drawn bowstring, and Yi knows it will snap soon. His hand trembles as he writes some nights, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Still, he forces the brush across the page, forcing thought into record, as though by shaping words he can hold together a world that threatens to break apart. In the flickering lamplight, his face appears both stern and sorrowful. He knows that history rarely remembers the weariness of its heroes. The songs will not sing of his sleepless nights, his hunger, the loneliness of command, yet perhaps he thinks the diary will remember. Perhaps the future, should it ever read these pages, will hear not only of battles, but of the silence between them. The silence that speaks of human cost. There are entries where his words soften, where the tide of war ebbs briefly, and he allows himself a moment of reflection. He writes of the sea itself, the restless companion that has shaped his life. He describes its mist, its winds, its sudden violence and its calm. The sea is both battlefield and bomb, both enemy and friend. He cannot leave it, even when he longs to. In it, he hears something eternal, something that calls him beyond himself. His men, too, find their anchor in him. When their spirits falter, when hunger gnaws or storms batter their ships, they look to Yi Sun-sin. He does not raise his voice often, but when he does, it cuts through despair like a lantern-piercing fog. His very presence is command enough. They know he will not abandon them, because he has never abandoned his post, no matter how great the weight upon him, and yet how fragile even the strongest man can be. As the months pass, as winter draws near, Yi feels the closeness of his limits. He is not immortal, his body aches, his breath grows heavy. Still, he writes, still, he sails, still, he carries duty like a stone upon his chest. If he dreams of peace, it is a dream deferred, sealed between the lines of his diary. His ink becomes the only place where he can lay down his burden, if only for a moment. The brush strokes are his sighs, his silences, his whispered confessions to time itself. And so the Admiral does not rest. He keeps the sea. He keeps the nation. He keeps the diary that will outlast him, a mirror of his soul set against the storm. The night grows long, the war grows near its final clash. Yi bends once more over the parchment, ink pooling like the deep waters he knows so well. He writes, not for us, not for the glory of history, but because he must. Because silence is heavier than words. Because even the most steadfast heart needs a place to lay down its burden. And when the last line of the night is written, he blows out the lamp and steps back into darkness, ready to face yet another dawn upon the sea. Soon the diary will close, and the lanterns of fleets will gather upon the black water. From Yi's ink-stained silence, we move toward the restless stir of oars and voices, the gathering of ships that wait in the night. The sea in December carries a different weight. Its waters do not simply flow, they press upon the world with a stillness that feels eternal, as though every ripple waits for some unspoken word. At Noryang Strait, where Korea's jagged coast narrows into a passage, winter's breath hangs low over the dark horizon. The tide pulls quietly through the channel, whispering against the rocks, as if rehearsing the voices it will carry when battle comes with morning. Yi Sun-sin knows this silence. He stands upon the deck of his flagship, the chill cutting deep through his armor, the sea air biting even through his scarred skin. It is not the first time he has waited on the edge of dawn, when the weight of history leans heavy and the heart trembles between dread and duty. Yet tonight feels different. Tonight, the shadow of finality stretches long. The war has burned for 7 years. Villages smoulder still, their ashes caught in the wind. Farmers, once steady at their ploughs, now drift as beggars across the peninsula. Children grow up with the sound of boots and drums as their lullabies. Japan's armies, once bold with conquest, now find themselves exhausted, hemmed in by sea and distance. Korea has bled, yet endured, and China, the great Ming Empire, has poured its soldiers across the Yellow Sea, fighting a war not entirely its own, but bound by the currents of survival and pride. Now all threads tighten here, in this narrow strait, where winter waves strike stone. Yi's fleet rests in the dark, sails drawn, anchors steady, Lanterns glow faintly, swaying like watchful eyes. Beyond them, hidden in the distance, the Japanese Navy prepares as well, desperate, fraying, yet still dangerous. Between them lies a silence almost holy in its intensity. It is the pause before storm, when the universe itself seems to hold its breath. The Admiral's thoughts drift backward. He recalls the prisons where chains bit into his flesh, the betrayals of court officials who feared his loyalty more than they honored his victories. He remembers the humiliation of dismissal, the ache of torture, the weight of disgrace. And yet, he also recalls the call of the sea, the way the waves seemed to summon him back, how his people's survival demanded he rise again. Each defeat, each injustice, carved his spirit sharper until only resolve remained. Now, standing on this deck, Yi feels the arc of his life bending toward its end. Not with bitterness, but with a strange calmness, as if he himself is a wave finally reaching the shore. The Ming commander, Chen Lin, lingers nearby, his eyes wary, his command worn thin by distance and doubt. Their alliance is uneasy, stitched by necessity rather than trust. Language divides them, ambition separates them, yet both know that come dawn, their fleets must fight as one. War has made strange companions of men who, in another life, might never have met. History does not always grant the luxury of chosen friendships. The Korean sailors murmur softly among themselves, voices hushed like prayers. Some speak of their families in hidden villages, others of comrades long buried at sea. A few sharpen blades, not for strength, but to keep their hands steady. They know what tomorrow may bring. In the lantern light, their faces glow with the mixture of fear and devotion that has carried them through countless storms. And then there is the sea itself. The waters of Noryang are not passive witnesses, they are the stage and the judge. The tides here run swift, tugging at ships with hidden strength. Currents swirl with treachery, rocks wait in silence beneath the surface. For centuries, sailors have whispered of the strait as a place of reckoning. Now, under the weight of two empires, it feels like the very heart of destiny. Yi Sun-sin does not offer his men promises of survival. He has never gilded his words with illusion. Instead, he tells them only truth, that they stand as guardians, not merely of a kingdom, but of memory, of dignity, of the fragile breath of a people who refuse to be erased. His voice carries softly across the ships, firm as iron yet tender as evening prayer. The men listen, and though fear lingers, it is joined by something deeper, a trust not in victory, but in meaning. Whatever dawn brings, their stand will not be forgotten. Far to the south, the Japanese fleet gathers in shadows. Their commanders weigh the odds with grim eyes. Retreat is nearly impossible, honor demands one final blow, and desperation can make even a dying force fierce. They too know what tomorrow may hold, not triumph, but the attempt to carve meaning from the end. The sea does not belong to the victors alone, it holds the tears of those who fall. Night deepens. The stars flicker faintly through winter haze. Time stretches thin, the hours drifting like leaves caught on water. On the deck of his ship, Yi Sun-sin closes his eyes for a moment. He does not dream of peace. Peace feels too distant. But he feels the closeness of fate, like the hush before a temple bell is struck. And so the night continues, heavy with silence. A silence that is not absence, but presence. The silence of ancestors watching, the silence of the sea waiting, the silence of history gathering breath. Somewhere beyond the horizon, dawn stirs. With it will come fire and steel, cries of men and the crash of waves. the mingling of two navies in a struggle that will echo long after the bodies sink. But here, for this last fragile stretch of night, all is still. The shadow of Noryang lengthens, and in it, Yi Sun-sin stands like a figure carved from the sea itself, enduring, immovable, prepared. The strait waits shrouded in silence, as if the world itself leans toward dawn. And when the first light breaks, it will not simply reveal the sea. It will summon the final test of an admiral's life, where courage meets fate upon the waves. The night before battle is a silence unlike any other. It is not the silence of peace, nor the silence of sleep. It is a silence suspended, like a breath held too long, waiting for release. Over the Strait of Noryang, in the last days of 1598, such a silence settles, deep and unbroken, as fleets gather in the dark. Lanterns bob upon the black water. From the decks of Korean paneoksan and turtle ships, small yellow flames glow, their reflections trembling in the waves. From the hulls of great Chinese war junks, more lanterns hang, their light pale and distant. Together, these scattered lights form constellations upon the sea, as though the heavens themselves have descended into the water to bear witness. The ships drift slowly into formation. Timber groans as ropes are drawn taut. The steady rhythm of oars rises and falls, echoing like a heartbeat beneath the night sky. Men whisper to one another, their voices low, careful not to disturb the stillness. They adjust armor, check the flint of muskets, steady trembling hands. Some bow their heads in silent prayer. Others stare out into the horizon where the Japanese fleet waits, invisible yet present, like a shadow pressing at the edge of thought. It has been years of war. The sailors are weary, worn thin by hunger, by endless struggle, by the knowledge that home is not yet safe. And yet tonight, there is also a strange solemnity among them. For they know that the end draws near. The war that has consumed their land and sea is tightening into its final knot. And it will be here, at Noryang, that it comes undone. Admiral Yi moves quietly among his men. He does not speak in speeches tonight. He speaks in presence, in the still way he carries himself. His officers bow slightly as he passes, their faces lit in the glow of lanterns. They see in him what they need to see. Calm where they feel fear, strength where they feel weakness. He inspects the lines, the oars, the readiness of the cannons. His eyes, sharp even in darkness, seem to see not only the ships around him, but the invisible thread of destiny stretching across the strait. Alongside the Koreans sail their allies from the Ming dynasty. The Chinese fleet is vast, their ships towering, their sails heavy in the night air, and yet this alliance is uneasy, woven less by friendship than by necessity. There are murmurs of mistrust, the weight of different tongues, the friction of pride. But even these tensions yield tonight, bent beneath the greater gravity of survival. For if the Japanese break through, the sea itself may be lost, and with it the fragile hope of peace. The water carries every sound, the creak of oarlocks, the flutter of banners in the night breeze, the faint cough of a sailor. The sea is not asleep, it listens, holding every noise in its dark expanse. Even the fish below, it seems, still their movements, as though all creation waits with the men above. Somewhere in the distance, a drum sounds. A single low beat, then silence again. It is not yet the call to battle, but a reminder the hour approaches. The sailors shift uneasily. Some tighten the knots of their helmets, their fingers fumbling in haste. Others clutch their weapons close, feeling the weight of steel in their palms as if seeking reassurance. On every deck, fear and courage mingle, indistinguishable. The night deepens. Cold mist creeps across the water, curling around hulls, wrapping men in a damp shroud. The lanterns grow hazy, their light diffused so that the fleets seem to float not only on the sea, but in a dream. In this dreamlike stillness, even time itself seems hesitant to move forward. Admiral Yi stands at the prow of his flagship, his gaze fixed on the unseen enemy. His thoughts are hidden, sealed within the fortress of his silence. Yet, if one could hear the unspoken words of his heart, they might sound like a prayer not for himself, but for his men, for the land that depends on them, for the dawn that will rise whether he stands to see it or not. The gathering of ships is more than a military maneuver. It is a ritual, a quiet invocation of resolve, every lantern raised, every oar drawn, every breath held. It all becomes part of a liturgy of war, a solemn chorus offered to the sea. The men may not call it so, yet they feel it. Deep in their bones this night is not ordinary. It is the threshold. From afar, the Japanese fleet also gathers, though unseen in the mist. Their torches burn, their hulls creak, their voices murmur across the water. Between the two forces stretches a gulf of darkness, heavy with anticipation. Soon, that darkness will ignite with fire and iron, but not yet. Not in this moment of suspension. The sea itself seems to hold them, like a hand holding breath, refusing to let it go. It has seen centuries of ships come and go, of wars flare and fade. It has cradled kings and peasants alike in its waters, and now it cradles this fleet, this fragile assembly of hope and fear, waiting to test which will endure. As the hours slip forward, the men grow quieter still. Sleep does not come easily, their bodies are taut with waiting. Some close their eyes against the mast, pretending at rest, though their hearts beat too quickly. Others stare into the black horizon, willing dawn to arrive, though knowing what it will bring. This night, above all, is a night of listening. Listening to the creak of timbers, to the breath of comrades, to the whisper of the sea. Listening for the first sound of drums that will break the silence, for the cannon's roar that will end the waiting. History itself seems to lean forward, ear pressed to the dark, listening for the sound of destiny's first note. And so the ships remain, lanterns flickering, oars stilled at last, sails furled against the night. 1,000 men hold their breath together, waiting for the sea to give its signal. Before long, the silence will shatter, the mist will split, and drums will thunder against the dawn. But for now, the fleets drift in waiting, history balanced upon the edge of the first drum beat. The horizon is still shrouded in darkness when the first drumbeat comes. It is deep, low, a sound that seems to rise not only from wood and leather, but from the belly of the earth itself. It reverberates across the water, carried on mist, carried on breath, and it strikes the hearts of men who wait in silence. One drumbit, then another, then a third, until the stillness is no longer still, but trembling. Lanterns sway with the rhythm. Oars dip into the water in time, and suddenly the gathering of ships, which only hours before floated like constellations in stillness, begins to move. The Korean fleet pushes forward, its formations tight, precise, rehearsed through years of war. Beside them, the towering Chinese ships move with slower grace, their drums answering in echo. The sea, which held its breath through the long night, now exhales with a rush. The mist begins to break. At first, it is only a thinning of the fog, a pale suggestion of dawn filtering through. Then it tears, and in that tearing, shadows emerge. The outline of ships, dozens, then hundreds, loom ahead. The Japanese fleet, clustered and waiting, reveals itself like a dark forest suddenly discovered on the edge of sight. Torches flicker on their decks. Armor glints faintly in the half-light. The distance that separated enemy from enemy has collapsed. The first cannon fires. It is a flash of orange in the mist, followed by a crack that splits the morning in two. The sound echoes across the strait, bouncing against the cliffs, reverberating through the bones of every man. The ball smashes into the water, sending a column of spray into the air. Then, like sparks catching dry tinder, other cannons roar in reply. The sea erupts. Flames leap from decks as fire arrows arc through the sky, their trails glowing like brief constellations before plunging into wood and rope. Iron balls rip through hulls, shattering planks, sending fragments into the air. Men cry out, not in harmony, but in a chorus of fear, command, and pain. Amid the chaos, Admiral Yi's drums do not falter. Their rhythm is steady, unyielding, a heartbeat for the fleet. Sailors pull harder at their oars, their muscles burning, their breaths ragged. The ships respond like living creatures, turning, advancing, pressing against the tide of the enemy. The turtle ships surge forward first. Their iron-spiked roofs glisten with dew, their snouts bristling with cannons. They push into the Japanese lines, their sides impervious to boarding, their mouths spitting fire and smoke. The sound of their advance is like thunder rolling low over the sea, steady and unstoppable. Frame by frame, the battle unfolds. A Korean broadside crashes into a Japanese vessel, wood splintering, men flung into the air. Another ship, struck in its heart, lists heavily before sinking, its lanterns winking out one by one. Flames leap up mast by mast, turning night into day. Smoke thickens, swallowing the mist, until the strait is a furnace of fire and fog. The sea itself suffers. It shudders beneath the weight of so many hulls. It groans as wreckage tumbles into its depths. The water darkens with soot and blood. Oars snap, sails collapse. Floating timbers knock against one another, a grim percussion beneath the drum beats of war. Through the storm, Yi Sun-sin stands at the prow of his flagship. He does not shout wildly as others might. His commands are measured, his voice steady, cutting through noise like a blade. His officers move swiftly, relaying orders, adjusting the fleet's movements with precision. To his men, it feels as though their admiral sees the battle not as chaos but as design, as though he knows each note before it is played. And yet, even design bends under fire. At times, Japanese ships ram forward with ferocity, their warriors leaping across decks with swords drawn. Muskets flash, screams rise, steel meets steel in desperate struggle. The air itself quivers with the closeness of death. Still, the Koreans push back, their discipline forged from years of defense, their hearts bound by the steady beat of the admiral's drum. Above it all, the dawn finally breaks. A pale light spills across the strait, mingling with fire, smoke, and blood. The new day does not arrive gently, it arrives as a witness to fury. The mist that once concealed now reveals the immensity of the clash. Hundreds of ships locked in combat, stretching as far as the eye can see, their forms tangled in a deadly dance. For the men within it, time slows. Moments stretch like threads. A musket shot pierces the air. A man falls, his cry cut short. A mast collapses with a groan, its fall scattering embers across the deck. A cannonball tears through two ships at once, its roar followed by silence where voices once were. Every instant is etched with clarity, as though the sea itself records each breath, and through it all, the drums, beating, relentless. They remind every sailor that this battle is not chaos alone. It is a struggle shaped by purpose, held together by the will of one man who refuses to let despair break the line. Hours pass in fire. The Japanese press hard, their numbers vast, their desperation fierce. But the Korean and Chinese fleets, bound by necessity, hold the strait like a gate barred against intruders. Ships burn, yes, but ships also endure. The sea swallows wrecks, yes, but the sea also carries survivors forward. Yi Sun-sin's flagship presses deeper into the heart of the fray. His voice rises above cannon fire, above screams, commanding, directing, never faltering. He knows this battle is more than a clash of ships. It is the final chord of a long and bitter war. To falter now would be to let years of sacrifice sink beneath the waves. The sun climbs higher, its light now stark and merciless. The smoke curls upward, blotting it, yet its rays break through, striking the water with harsh brilliance. Men squint against it, sweat mixing with blood, breath ragged, arms trembling as they fight on. The sea is no longer silent. It is alive with sound, drums, cannons, cries, the crash of wood upon wood, the hiss of fire upon water. It is a symphony of destruction, vast and unrelenting. And yet, within it, there is rhythm, there is order, there is the unyielding will of a fleet that refuses to break. The first drums of dawn have opened the storm. The day will not close without its cost. But for now the ships move, the cannons roar, and the sea burns with memory that will never fade. The drums beat on, but within the storm, patterns begin to emerge, a dance of ships, a choreography of survival shaped by Yi Sun-sin's hand. From thunder, we move toward movement into the dance that defines the battle's heart. The sea at Noryang is no longer still. The first drums of dawn have passed, and now the strait itself becomes a stage where ships move like dancers caught in a storm of fire and smoke. Waves churn not only from the wind, but from the wake of oars cutting hard against the water. Splinters float like shreds of memory, while the mist that once cloaked the fleets now swirls in patches, torn apart by cannon fire. Here, in this narrow channel, war takes the shape of a dance. It is not the frantic chaos of men rushing blindly into death, but something more deliberate, almost ceremonial. Admiral Yi has seen too many battles to mistake frenzy for victory. He knows that survival requires rhythm, precision, patience, each movement in harmony with the whole. At the center of the Korean formation, the turtle ships glide forward, armored beasts of oak and iron. Their curved backs bristle with spikes to deter boarding, their mouths belch fire and smoke. They are less like vessels than moving fortresses, compact and stubborn, one yielding against the press of Japanese ships that seek to overwhelm them. From their flanks, cannons thunder in measured bursts, tearing through hulls, silencing the creak of oars with the splintering crack of wood. The Japanese commanders, desperate yet determined, push their ships into the strait. Their vessels are lighter, faster, built for boarding and close combat. They dart forward like blades in the dark, attempting to close the distance before Korean firepower can tear them apart. Grappling hooks fly, ropes strain, but the turtle ships slip away, pivoting with surprising grace for their size. Each turn is a counterstroke, each broadside a brushstroke upon the canvas of the sea. From the quarterdeck of his flagship, Admiral Yi watches with a gaze that never wavers. He does not shout. His voice is steady, low, yet it carries across the waves as if the sea itself bends to hear him. Orders pass through the fleet not in panicked cries, but in calm instruction. To one side, a squadron is directed to press forward, circling around an advancing cluster of Japanese ships. To the other, a reserve line holds firm, ready to close the trap. Yi's calm is not the absence of fear, it is the mastery of it, the ability to see the pattern in the chaos, to hear the rhythm of war beneath the thunder of cannon. Others might see only smoke and blood, but he sees choreography, ships wheeling like dancers, the sea itself a floor upon which each vessel has its place. The clash is brutal, yet strangely ordered. A Japanese ship charges, its bow cutting foam, archers releasing volleys into the air. Arrows rain against the armoured hull of a turtle ship, glancing off with little more than sparks. The Korean ship pivots, its cannons aligned. A single blast and the Japanese vessel shudders, its timbers cracking open. Flames leap, smoke bellows, and the ship staggers back into the current like a wounded animal. Elsewhere, the Chinese reinforcements strike, their heavier war junks, bearing broad sails and rows of cannons, add weight to the rhythm. They move less quickly than the Koreans, but their volleys roar with devastating force. Together, Korean and Chinese vessels weave a net that tightens with every passing moment, constricting the Japanese fleet within the narrow strait. But it is not without cost. The Japanese are fierce, unrelenting. They swarm in clusters, desperate to break through. One Korean vessel, struck by fire arrows, begins to burn. Sailors scramble, dousing flames with seawater, even as enemy ships press in, trying to board. Swords clash, shouts rise, and for a moment the careful dance threatens to dissolve into chaos. Yet Admiral Yi's hand steadies the rhythm. A signal flag rises. A drum beats from another ship, low and deep. Reinforcements sweep in, their oars pulling strong, their cannons ready. They cut across the Japanese flank, scattering the attackers, rescuing their embattled comrades. The burning ship, though scarred, finds room to breathe. Order returns, and the pattern resumes. To those watching from the shore, or perhaps from some divine vantage, the scene might appear less like a battle than a great, violent bullet. Ships turn and wheel, closing and parting, each movement responding to another. Smoke drifts like curtains across the stage, revealing and concealing, while the sea itself provides both floor and frame. Admiral Yi is the choreographer. He does not move with sword in hand upon the deck, but with vision, with foresight. He places ships where they must be, anticipates the enemy's thrust, and answers not with panic but with precision. His men trust him utterly. They know that when he raises his hand it is not in desperation but in quiet certainty. And so, amid the thunder of cannon and the scream of fire, there is an undercurrent of strange calm. The Koreans fight not as scattered men, but as a single body, each vessel a limb, each sailor a heartbeat. They are bound together by discipline, by faith in their admiral, by the knowledge that this battle is not only for victory, but for survival, for the chance to close a long war and see their homeland breathe again. The Japanese, too, fight with desperation. Their commanders know that escape is their only hope, that the strait itself is their enemy as much as the ships around them. They lash out, ship against ship, blade against cannon, trying to carve a path through. Some succeed for a moment, slipping past the Korean line, only to find themselves hemmed in again, cut off by another wing of the Allied fleet. Slowly, painfully, the dance turns against them. Their movements grow frantic. their patterns break. Where once they pressed forward in unison, now they scatter, colliding with one another, their shouts rising not in rhythm but in confusion. Flames consume more ships, and the sea fills with debris, broken masts, shattered planks, floating corpses. Through it all, Admiral Yi stands firm. He knows that war is not only about force but about timing. He waits until the moment ripens, until the enemy's desperation breaks their order. Only then does he give the signal for the final press. The encirclement, the closing of the jaws. His fleet surges forward, tightening the net. It is a terrible beauty, this dance of ships. Each cannon blast is a drumbeat. Each turn of the oars is a step in the choreography. Each sinking vessel is a note struck in a grim symphony that echoes across the strait. And Yi, calm amid the storm, conducts it all, not as a man caught in battle, but as one who has already seen the pattern written in the sea and knows how it will end. And yet, even in this dance of fire and iron, destiny waits with its own steps still hidden. For battles, however artful, do not last forever, and as the smoke settles, the sea will reveal what it has taken and what it has spared. The sea carries its scars quietly. Unlike the earth, it bears no trenches, no charred foundations, no toppled stones to mark where men once fell. Instead, it gathers the broken pieces into its shifting body, hiding them beneath waves that seem as smooth as glass to any who look from a distance. Yet those who stand upon its decks, those who listen closely, know that the sea remembers. At Noryang Strait, the battle rages into morning. The clash of cannon, the cries of oarsmen, the rush of fire, all swell into a storm of sound. Yet storms pass, and when they do, silence always follows. It is in that silence that the true weight of war is felt, not in the noise of the fight, but in the ache that lingers when the voices are gone. The waters here darken with oil and blood. Splintered beams drift like the bones of fallen beasts. The cries of sailors, fierce at first, now fade into a quieter chorus. Groans, prayers, final breaths swallowed by the tide. The sea does not resist, it receives. Like an endless grave, it widens to take in the bodies of the young, the brave, the desperate. Men who only hours ago rode with hope, their eyes fixed on survival or victory. Admiral Yi watches, though not with triumph. His gaze, steady as stone, cannot ignore the cost. He has lived long enough to know that every stroke of glory leaves a wound. His ships may cut through enemy lines, his strategy may hold fast, but the sea itself whispers of the price being paid. Even the strongest hull groans when struck, and even the bravest man trembles when death draws near. This is the nature of war at sea. It is not the grand clash of banners seen on land, where generals ride and soldiers charge in wide open fields. It is closer, more intimate, more suffocating. A ship is a fragile island, and every man upon it knows the thinness of its wooden walls. When cannonballs tear through the planks, the ocean rushes in immediately, cold, merciless, eager to reclaim what man dares float upon it. In such moments, courage does not roar, it gasps, it clings, it sinks. One can almost hear it, the sharp crack of an oar snapping in two, the desperate splash of men thrown into water colder than steel, the muffled gurgle as lungs fill with salt. A soldier on land may fall with the sky above him. At sea, a man falls into silence, embraced by darkness. The difference is not small. It is the difference between being remembered and being hidden, between a grave that can be visited and one that drifts beyond sight. Admiral Yi knows this too. In his war diary, He has written of the sea's cruelty, of the way it consumes without leaving even a marker behind. He knows that in battle, ships vanish not just from the fight, but from memory, slipping under waves with all their stories intact. For every ship that burns on the surface, another sinks quietly unseen, its crew extinguished in a single breath. The men who survive row harder, as if each stroke of the oar might erase what has just been lost. They call to one another, their voices cracked, desperate to remind themselves they are still alive. The drums still beat, but beneath them, grief settles like fog. War demands focus, but the human heart cannot close itself so easily. Every sailor who sees a comrade fall carries that wound, even if he does not speak it aloud. The sea too carries it. One only has to watch the surface, restless with currents, to know it resists forgetting. The waves churn, scattering debris, pressing fragments of ships into new shapes, but always they return some reminder. A floating plank, a torn rope, a helmet bobbing like a lantern snuffed too soon. These are the relics of the moment, drifting aimlessly, as though waiting for hands that will never return to claim them. And yet, amid this ruin, the battle does not cease. There is no pause granted by the sea. The fleets push on, driven by orders and the will to survive. Even Admiral Yi, who feels the heaviness in his chest, does not allow the grief to slow his command. He cannot. For if he stops, even for a heartbeat, the tide might shift and all would be lost. Duty does not ask if the heart is wary, it demands only that the hand remains steady. Still, beneath his calm voice, beneath the measured commands, the wound of the sea grows deeper. It is not one man's loss but many, layered upon one another until the strait itself seems to echo with sorrow. Perhaps that is why the mist lingers longer here, as though the air itself has thickened with grief. Perhaps that is why seagulls wheel overhead, restless, crying into the smoke-filled dawn. Nature itself seems unsettled, disturbed by the violence it has been forced to witness. For those who listen to history, there is a temptation to remember only the outcome. The victory, the defeat, the turning of tides that shaped nations. But if one listens closely, if one allows the silence to speak, then another truth rises. The truth of the individual, of the nameless sailor whose final breath was not recorded, whose family would never see him return. History may honor admirals and kings, but the sea holds the memory of the forgotten. And so we pause. In the midst of the clash, in the shadow of victory, we pause here in the wound. For history is not only thunder, it is also the silence after. The silence of ships drifting without crew, of water rippling over the sunken, of lives that flickered out before the dawn could fully rise. If we walk too quickly past this moment, we miss the humanity of it all. Admiral Yi does not miss it. He carries it, as he has carried every loss before. Perhaps that is why his commands are so resolute, not because he is unfeeling, but because he feels too deeply. He knows what is at stake, and he knows the only way to honor the fallen is to keep moving forward. Yeah. In the stillness of his gaze, in the measured tone of his words, the sea's grief is mirrored. The strait breathes heavily now, its waters clouded, its waves heavy. Ships continue to strike, men continue to fight. But beneath it all lies the ache of wounds that will never heal. War does not end when the last cannon is fired. It lingers, in memory, in silence, in the sea itself. We too must linger here for a moment longer, to remember not just the admiral, not just the victory, but the countless souls who vanish into salt and shadow, Their courage dissolves not into nothingness, but into the living memory of the waves. For the sea, though wounded, never forgets. The strait grows quieter, but its silence is heavy, carrying both grief and memory. And in that hush, the shadow of fate begins to draw close, an arrow poised, unseen, waiting in the dark. Morning rises reluctantly over the Strait of Noryang. The battle roars on, louder now, fiercer, as though the sea itself has been set ablaze. Cannon smoke curls across the water like low clouds. Oars slap rhythm against the waves. The cries of sailors blend with the boom of iron, the crack of wood. The desperate songs of men holding fast against death. Victory leans heavily toward the Allied fleet, yet in war. No triumph comes without a shadow. Admiral Yi Sun-sin stands upon his deck, calm at the center of the storm. His eyes, steady and sharp, sweep the field of chaos before him. Around him, ships burn, waves churn, and men cry out, but he does not waver. He has carried Korea through storms greater than this. His voice rises above the noise, issuing commands with clarity, steady as the beat of a drum. He has done this countless times, yet today feels different. The dawn carries an edge, a strange stillness beneath the noise, as if something unseen stirs in the smoke. Fate often arrives like this, quietly, in the space between moments. The Allied fleets press forward, the Japanese line faltering. Turtle ships strike like iron phantoms, their hulls armoured, their cannons spitting flame. Ming War junks close from the flank, their sails swelling in the cold wind. Japanese ships, once proud and swift, now splinter beneath the relentless assault. It is a scene of triumph, the kind of moment history would carve into legend. And yet in legend, victory and loss often share the same breath. From the smoke, a single arrow flies. No one sees the hand that looses it. Perhaps it comes from a desperate archer clinging to the last moments of battle, or from a ship hidden in the haze. Its crew unwilling to yield. It does not matter. The arrow cuts through the air with a whisper, carried by the will of chance, or perhaps by destiny itself. It strikes Admiral Yi. The sound is not loud, not the thunder of cannon, not the roar of fire, but small, almost intimate, like the snap of a branch in a quiet forest. And yet, for those who see it, time slows. The Admiral staggers. His body bends. His hand instinctively grasps the shaft. His face, usually resolute as stone, pales with sudden pain. Around him, his officers rush forward. Panic threatens to crack their composure. "Admiral," they cry. But Yi, even as his body falters, does not allow fear to take root. His breath comes heavy, but his voice, though faint, carries the weight of command. "Do not let my death be known," he whispers. His eyes, sharp still, pierce through the fog of panic. "Beat the drum. Advance." It is a command both simple and profound. In those few words, Yi gives the last of himself, not to his wound, not to despair, but to his men, his nation, his duty. He knows the sight of his fall would unravel them, would turn victory into collapse. He knows that his life, though great, is smaller than the cause he serves. The officers hear and understand. Their hearts break silently, but they obey. The drum begins again, deep and unbroken, echoing across the strait like the heartbeat of the fleet. Sailors, hearing it, do not sense death at their helm but strength. They row harder, fight fiercer, believing their admiral still guides them. Yi is carried to the rear of the ship. Blood stains his armor, soaking into the wood beneath him. His nephew and his son remain at his side. Their faces tight with grief they cannot show. They hold his hands, whisper his name. but they know his command is greater than their sorrow. They must shield the truth, even from the men standing only feet away. The admiral's breaths shorten. Each inhale is a battle, each exhale a surrender to the weight pressing upon him. Yet his eyes remain open, fixed on the horizon, on the fight he will not finish, but will see through in spirit. He has long carried the burden of war, and now, in these final breaths, he carries it still. Outside, the battle surges. Allied ships strike hard, pressing their advantage. Japanese decks shatter, their men leap into the water, their cries mixing with the steady beat of the drum. The sea, though wounded, roars with the force of struggle. Victory draws closer with every moment, pulled not by chance, but by the command Yi gave in his last strength. It is strange how history often pivots on such fragile threads. A single arrow, loosed in the smoke, could undo years of resilience. Yet he refuses to let it. Even in his dying, he denies fate its full triumph. He bends it instead toward his will, commanding life even in the face of death. As he lies in the dim space of the cabin, Yi's mind wanders. Perhaps he sees his years of service flash before him, the tortures he endured in prison, the betrayals that nearly broke him, the storms weathered with too few ships against too many foes. Perhaps he sees his men, their faces burned into his memory, each one a life he has tried to shield. Or perhaps he sees only the sea, the endless horizon he has guarded, the waves that will hold him when his body grows still. The admiral does not cry out, nor does he curse his fate. He accepts it with the same quiet strength he has shown in every hardship. His life has never been his own. It has always belonged to the sea, to the people, to the survival of his homeland. Now, as the tide of battle turns in Korea's favor, he offers his final breath as payment. The fleet does not know. To them, the admiral still stands, still guides, still commands through the beat of the drum. Their arms ache, their eyes sting from smoke, but they press forward. They fight as though his spirit sails above them, and in truth it does. On the deck where Yi once stood, smoke curls upward, drifting into the pale sky. The sound of battle begins to fade at the edges, though its center still roars. The strait is littered with wreckage, the water a mirror of ruin. Yet the drumbeat persists, steady and unyielding, hiding the silence that has fallen behind it. Yi's eyes close at last. His chest rises once more, then falls, leaving behind the echo of his words. Around him, his family weeps quietly, but they do not falter in their duty. The admiral's secret remains safe for now, carried forward by the rhythm of war. Outside, victory nears. The Japanese fleet falters, their lines broken, their ships scattered. The Allied forces press harder, their confidence unbroken, unaware that the heart of their courage has already stilled. The sea, in its vastness, cradles both triumph and loss together, its waves indifferent yet eternal. And so, history bends again, not with the crash of cannon or the roar of flames, but with the whisper of a dying man giving all that remained of him to a cause greater than himself. The arrow in the dark has struck, but it cannot silence the command that carries across the water. Beat the drum, advance. The drum still echoes, masking the silence behind it. Soon that silence will spread, and the fleet will sail forward, not knowing their guardian has already fallen. The sound of the drum carries across the water like the heartbeat of a nation. Deep, steady, relentless. It does not falter, even when the man who gave the order to keep it beating lies still within his cabin. Each strike of the mullet against the taut skin resounds like a vow, echoing from ship to ship, pulling weary arms back into motion, steadying hearts that tremble with exhaustion. The sailors do not know. To them, the admiral still watches, still commands, still holds the storm of battle within his grasp. They imagine his figure tall upon the deck, his eyes sharp through the smoke, his voice cutting through chaos as it always has. They row harder, strike fiercer, because they believe he is there, guiding them still. In truth, he is gone, but his spirit remains woven into the rhythm of the drum. The Japanese fleet falters. Their ships break apart under the relentless assault. Fire leaps across their decks. The cries of their men scatter like birds startled into flight. The Allied fleet surges forward with the strength of a tide, sweeping away resistance. The drumbeats keep them bound, ship to ship, man to man, until they seem less like individuals and more like a single living body, pulsing with one unbroken rhythm. It is a paradox. How silence can be hidden beneath noise, how absence can masquerade as presence. The sailors feel no gap, no rupture, for Yi's last command has sealed it. He knew that death was inevitable, but despair was not. He gave his men one final shield, the illusion of his unbroken leadership, carried on the drum's thunder. Inside the cabin, where few dare to enter, silence reigns. Yi's son and nephew remain at his side, their faces pale, their eyes wet with grief, yet they do not break. They know the cost of a single cry, a single word revealed too soon. If the men outside knew their admiral was gone, fear would seep into their veins, and hesitation would follow. Victory, so close, could collapse into ruin. So they guard the secret. Their tears fall silently onto the planks of the ship, mixing with the blood of the man who gave everything. They wipe their faces, stand tall, and move with deliberate calm, as though nothing has changed. Their grief is hidden, swallowed like a stone in the depths of the sea. The drum spares them. Each thunderous beat outside the cabin reminds them that the admiral's will lives on in the sound. Yi's words, beat the drum, advance, become reality, echoing not only in wood and skin, but in the hearts of every man who hears it. The battle grows fiercer. Smoke drifts like torn veils across the strait, stinging eyes, clogging lungs. The waters, already thick with wreckage, churn with new waves of sinking ships. Men shout, clash and fall, yet through it all, the Allied fleet does not falter. The drum tells them they are unbreakable, and so they are. There is something sacred about rhythm. From the earliest days of war, drums have bound armies together, steadying their pace, drowning their fear. In Yi's final dawn, the drum becomes more than a tool of war. It becomes a vessel of his spirit, a bridge between life and death, command and silence. Every strike upon it is his final breath extended, repeated, carried forward until the battle is won. The Japanese sailors, though fierce, feel the weight of it. They hear the Korean drums pounding over the water and sense an iron will that will not yield. They fight bravely, but the sound tells them the truth. The tide has turned, and it will not turn back. On the Allied ships, oars bend with strain, muscles ache, but men do not stop. They push themselves beyond the limits of flesh because the drum will not let them rest. Each beat says, not yet, not until this sea is ours. And so, even as Yi's body lies still, his fleet moves with a force he has never seen before. His death, hidden, does not weaken them, it strengthens them. For what they do not know is that they are no longer rowing for his command, but for his memory. His last words have already transformed into something larger than orders. They are destiny. The cabin grows colder. Yi's son looks at his father's face, pale and serene in death, and feels the world shift. He wants to cry out, to tell the men who fight outside that their leader is gone, to share the weight of the grief pressing against his chest. But then the drum sounds again, loud and unbroken, and he remembers his father's command. He bites back his grief, sealing it within, carrying it like a stone in his throat. Outside, the sea begins to change. The once proud Japanese fleet breaks apart, its formations shattered. Ships burn, listing into the waves, their crews scattering. Victory grows closer, each beat of the drum striking like a hammer on the walls of resistance. The Korean and Ming sailors fight as though their admiral's gaze is upon them, as though he sees every act of courage, every sacrifice. They fight not just for survival, but for the man they believe still leads them. And in a way, he does. For leadership is not only a voice shouted in command, it is a presence felt in the marrow of those who follow. Yi has spent his life carving his spirit into his men, shaping them with discipline, trust, and courage. Now, even in death, that presence holds them together. The sun climbs higher, its light diffused through the smoke. The sea gleams with fire and shadow, and still the drum does not break. Its sound is the only certainty in a world of chaos. The promise that the fight will not falter, that the men will not yield, that Korea's last dawn of war will not be one of defeat. By the time the tide of battle begins to turn decisively, the sailors are half blind with exhaustion, their arms numb, their throats raw. But they continue, driven by a rhythm that feels eternal. Each man becomes less himself and more a part of something larger, a fleet bound not by rope or wood, but by the unshakable pulse of courage. He lies still, but his command echoes through them, unbroken, unwavering. The drum is his last voice, speaking across the water long after his breath has gone. And the men, unknowingly, carry him forward into victory. The battle presses toward its end, yet within the triumph stirs an emptiness, a silence that will soon rise when the truth is revealed. The sea grows heavy with smoke. The morning mist, once pale and cool, now thickens with the breath of battle. From the decks of shattered ships, wood groans, iron cracks, voices cry out in languages that will soon be lost to silence. The Strait of Noryang becomes a graveyard and a witness, its waves folding gently over fire, splinters, and fading lives. The Japanese fleet, so long a thorn in the seas of Korea, begins to crumble. One by one, their vessels lose shape, swallowed not by sudden collapse, but by the slow weight of inevitability. The tide, which once carried them forward in bold invasion, now drags them back toward nothingness. Smoke coils upward as though heaven itself takes inventory of the fallen. Across the strait, Chinese and Korean ships press their advantage. Their oars beat steady, their cannons resound, their formations tighten like a net around prey too wary to break free. The turtle ships, iron-shelled and unrelenting, carve through the chaos like ancient beasts awakened from the deep. Fires leap from mast to mast. Lanterns, once used for signalling, now drip embers into the sea. The Japanese sailors, hardened by years of campaign, fight still, but theirs is the defiance of men who know the ground has already given way beneath them. Some clutch their swords not to strike, but to cling to the last fragments of honor. Others leap into the cold waters, seeking escape in currents that carry no mercy. The cries of drowning men mix with the thunder of cannon. The sea itself becomes an instrument, amplifying grief into echo. For the Korean sailors, there is both triumph and sorrow. Victory, long prayed for, begins to glimmer through the smoke. Yet with each passing moment, the absence of the admiral grows heavier, though his command still carries through the ranks. Yi Sun-sin's voice no longer calls from the deck, but his last order, "Do not let my death be known. Beat the drum. Advance," beats louder than any cannon. His men obey, not knowing that their guardian already drifts into silence. And so the battle surges. The drums, once paced by his living breath, now thunder as if sustained by the will of the sea itself. The fleet advances without falter, driven not by sight of their admiral, but by the force of his enduring presence. It is as though Yi himself has become the tide, unseen yet irresistible, carrying his men into victory. The Japanese retreat dissolves into chaos. Their flagship, surrounded and battered, lists under the weight of flames. Sails collapse, tangled like broken wings. Oars snap, splintering into fragments that float aimlessly before sinking. One commander, determined to salvage honor, rallies his men for a final push, but the effort shatters against the wall of Allied fire. No strategy can hold against a tide already turned. At last, the strait itself grows quiet, though the quiet is not peace but exhaustion. Smoke hangs low, clinging to the surface of the water like a mourning shroud. Bodies drift between the wrecks. Some cling still to planks, whispering prayers into the salt. Others float motionless, return to the sea that bore them here. The cries that filled the dawn thin into silence, replaced by the steady hiss of waves against ruined hulls. For years, the war had lingered. Villages burned, harvests trampled, countless lives scattered like ash. But here, in the cold waters of Noryang, the back of the invasion breaks. The Japanese fleet, once feared, is undone not by chance, but by endurance, the endurance of a nation, the endurance of its allies, and above all, the endurance of one man whose final command outlived his breath. The Korean sailors, rowing slowly now, look upon the wreckage with eyes that cannot yet comprehend relief. Victory feels heavy, almost unbearable, when bought at such a cost. They do not yet know the full truth of their admiral's silence, but something in the air tells them that the sea has claimed more than ships this morning. Their cheers falter, their oars dip with reverence. The Ming allies, too, pause in the aftermath. Their vessels, scarred and smoking, drift alongside Korean ships. Men lean on rails, exhausted. The strait is a tapestry of ruin, yet woven into that ruin is the fragile thread of an ending. For the first time in 7 long years, the war's horizon no longer stretches endlessly forward. The enemy shattered here will not return in strength. Dawn, once feared, begins to feel like promise, but beneath the promise lies shadow. The fleets drift over waters that hold both triumph and death. Somewhere, below decks, the body of the admiral rests, his final dawn already spent. Those who know the secret dare not speak it, for the moment demands silence. They understand that victory itself is a fragile vessel, one that must not be cracked open by grief too soon. The strait, though, remembers everything. It holds the cries of the fleeing, the clash of iron, the whispered command that kept courage alive. It holds the silence of a man who, in dying, became more present than in life. Every wave that laps against the wreckage carries memory forward. Every ripple that drifts toward shore whispers of the dawn when the enemy shattered. History, too, bends here. The war that once threatened to erase a nation instead concludes with its endurance proven. Yet history is not written in ink alone. It is carried in the salt of tears, in the smoke of burning decks, in the steady drum that beat even after its keeper's hands fell still. Victory is never just triumph. It is also absence, also grief, also the question of what will remain once the fires die and the waves grow calm. As the sun climbs higher, its light pierces through the smoke, gilding the broken masts with reluctant beauty. The sea shines, as seas always do, as though indifferent to what it has witnessed. But indifference is not forgetfulness. Beneath the glittering surface lies a memory too deep to fade. The strait becomes not only the site of an ending, but the keeper of a promise that sacrifice is never swallowed whole, but carried forward in silence. The enemy is shattered, the battle is done, yet in the quiet that follows, there lingers the awareness that victory has demanded more than anyone wished to give. The war bends toward its close, yet the heart of that ending is not celebration, but reverence. The waves settle, but within their hush lies a hidden sorrow. For even as the enemy shatters and the war bends toward its close, the sea carries a secret still unseen. The body of the admiral, lying silent, waiting for the chapter that will follow. The battle has ended, but the sea does not rest. Its surface carries the fragments of war, splintered masts, shattered oars, drifting bodies that belong to neither land nor nation anymore. Smoke lingers, a veil stretched thin across the strait. Victory has been won, yet within one ship there is no joy, only the stillness of a secret too heavy to speak. Admiral Yi Sun-sin lies motionless. His body, once the center of every command, now rests in silence, shielded from the eyes of allies and enemies alike. His armor bears the wound that ended him, but around him is no chaos, no clamor, only the quiet resolve of those who loved him. His son, Iho, kneels beside him, hands trembling yet steady as they conceal their grief. His nephew, Iwan, helps to cover the admiral's body with robes, shielding him from the gaze of the deck. They know what the admiral commanded. His death must remain unknown until victory is secure, and so they obey, though each breath they take feels weighted with stone. Around them, sailors row on, unaware that the man who guided them through storm and fire now lies in shadow. The drums still echo, the rhythm of survival unbroken. Victory demands silence, and silence they give. Yet beneath their steady strokes, each man carries a grief he cannot name, for something in the air, in the unspoken heaviness, tells them that the sea has claimed what no enemy could. It is a cruel paradox that triumph should arrive hand in hand with loss. The Korean fleet moves steadily, lanterns swaying above black waters, but on this flagship the light flickers dim. The admiral, who had borne the weight of 7 years of war, cannot be buried yet. His body must remain, not as a symbol, not as a relic, but as a hidden truth waiting for its time. History often tells of victory as a moment of joy, of songs raised, of hearts unburdened. But the truth here is different. The men of Yi's fleet row on, their faces drawn, their voices hushed, for the victory has cost them the one life they could not spare. They row as though rowing for him still, carrying his body across the water as if the sea itself must deliver him safely home. The Chinese allies, drifting closer, know nothing yet. To them, the admiral still lives in the thunder of the drums and the precision of the maneuvers that shattered the enemy. They look to his flagship as to a pillar of strength, unaware that within its walls lies the quiet of death. It is a secret too tender to release, too dangerous to reveal. If words spread too soon, the fragile unity of this moment might fracture. If grief erupted before the enemy was fully scattered, chaos could return. And so, secrecy becomes shield and silence becomes duty. Iho and Iwan, carrying their sorrow in locked hearts, take on the burden their commander entrusted to them. They stand watch, they give orders when needed, they ensure the fleet presses forward. Their tears, unshed, fall inward, watering the memory of the man who had raised them not just to fight, but to endure. Each gesture, each command they echo, feels like a thread tying the living to the dead. The Admiral himself had written, in his war diary, of fatigue beyond words, of a longing for peace that never came. Perhaps, in this moment of stillness, his body finally finds what his spirit had long sought. Yet, for his sailors, that peace is unreachable. They cannot pause, cannot mourn. They must continue rowing, their muscles aching, their hearts burning, their grief buried beneath duty. The sea around them, so recently filled with fire, begins to calm. But the calm is deceptive, for beneath it lies a heaviness that no tide can carry away. Each ripple seems to whisper of the Admiral's absence. Each wave carries the secret onward. Nature itself becomes a mourner, the gulls circle silently overhead, the wind grows hushed, as if all creation joins in guarding the body that cannot yet be laid to rest. The body of Yi Sun-sin becomes both burden and beacon. Though lifeless, it still commands reverence. Though silent, it speaks. His men glance toward the covered form and find strength to row on. They do not yet know how they will carry the news to the people, how they will shape the grief of a nation, but for now they know only this, that they must guard him until the time is right. The image of the Admiral lying in secrecy, unseen by the world, becomes the very symbol of the moment. Victory without celebration, loss without mourning. His death is suspended like a lantern shielded from wind, its flame preserved until it may be revealed. The men who guard him understand that their silence is not deception, but devotion. They keep his secret because they know what he gave them. His final breath was not for himself, but for their courage, their survival, their victory. The fleet drifts forward, wary yet resolute. Behind them, the wreckage of the Japanese Navy sinks into memory. Ahead lies home, and with it the task of telling a story that will break the hearts of all who hear it. But for now, the body remains where it is, cloaked, protected, unburied, not yet honored, not yet mourned. Held in waiting, like a word that trembles on the edge of speech, the sailors row on, their grief like embers smouldering quietly beneath ash. They cannot weep, cannot falter. They row with the knowledge that history itself watches them, that the sea records every stroke, that the Admiral's silence must be guarded until the world is ready to hear it. And so the body of Yi Sun-sin travels with them, still and silent, the weight of a nation resting not on his living shoulders, but upon the secrecy of his death. In this in-between moment, the war has ended, but mourning has not begun. It is a fragile, aching pause in history, a breath held before the flood of grief. The Admiral's body waits in silence, hidden yet present, while his men row on with sorrow locked deep within. Soon the truth will break and nations will mourn. But for now, secrecy holds the tide still, carrying us softly toward the morning of nations. The secret cannot be kept forever. For a brief span of hours, Admiral Yi Sun-sin's death is wrapped in silence. carried like a hidden ember among those closest to him. His body lies still within his flagship, veiled from the eyes of allies, shielded from the gaze of soldiers whose courage depends upon the illusion of his presence. But time, like the tide, cannot be held back. With the battle ended, with the Japanese fleet scattered and burning, the moment of revelation draws near. The news spreads first among his officers, whispered in trembling voices that hardly dare to believe it. The immovable guardian of the sea, the voice of command that had guided them through every storm, is gone. Some weep in secret. Others fall silent, as if language itself has abandoned them. The knowledge seeps outward, flowing from ship to ship, and with each telling the grief deepens. What began as a hidden ember becomes a flame that no secrecy can contain. When at last the truth reaches the allied commanders of Ming China, their faces darken. They had fought alongside him through storms of fire and salt, had seen in him not only a leader, but a presence that bound their uneasy alliance into purpose. Now, confronted with his death, they bow their heads in reverence. One chronicler would later record that the Chinese officers wept openly, declaring that such a man is not born in an age lightly. In their grief there is no rivalry, no boundary of nation, only the solemnity of witnessing the passing of a figure too rare to measure. Back on land, the word spreads among the Korean people. Villages still scarred by fire, families still mourning loved ones lost to the 7-year war, receive the news with a grief so profound it feels as though the sea itself has stilled. To the common folk, Admiral Yi was not merely a commander. He was the thin line between their survival and erasure, the steadfast shield who held back the tide of destruction. When they hear he is gone, it is as though the very ocean has died, leaving the shore unguarded. Mothers weep as though for their own sons. Farmers bow their heads in silence as though the sky itself had dimmed. In the royal court, where Yi had once endured suspicion, imprisonment, and even torture, the truth of his greatness can no longer be denied. King Sonjo, who in life had doubted him, who had been swayed by jealous rivals, now receives word of the admiral's sacrifice. History remembers the king's response as one of awe and belated reverence. He orders mourning throughout the land, recognizing that Yi Sun-sin's death is not merely the passing of a man, but the breaking of a pillar that held the nation upright. Court officials, who once plotted against him, now bow their heads, their envy dissolved into shame. The mourning crosses even the line of enmity. Among the Japanese, who fled from the crushing defeat at Noryang, stories are whispered of the admiral who stood unyielding until his final breath. Some among them, hardened warriors who respected courage even in an enemy, admit quietly that his death is a loss not only to Korea but to the art of war itself. To inspire reverence in friend and foe alike is a rare fate. In Yi's passing, even his enemies become mourners. The grief of nations gathers like a tide, not sudden but relentless. It spreads outward in ripples from ship to shore, from ally to enemy, from soldier to farmer, until the whole of the peninsula feels its weight. It is not only grief, however, but a strange unity. In his death, Yi Sun-sin becomes more than a man of Korea. He becomes a figure who binds together memories, transcending division. His passing reminds all who hear of it that greatness is not claimed by birth, nor secured by wealth, but forged through endurance and sacrifice. The mourning is not loud. It is not the clamour of trumpets or the noise of wailing processions. It is quieter, deeper, Like the long sigh of the sea after a storm. Lanterns are lit in villages, their small flames trembling in the night as families bow their heads. Soldiers, weary from years of campaign, stand still upon the shore, their armour dulled by smoke, their eyes filled with unshed tears. Ming commanders write letters home, their words heavy with sorrow for a man they will never forget. Even Japanese accounts, carried across the sea, speak of him with a tone of respect that rises above rivalry. History often marks battles with dates, treaties with signatures, and victories with monuments. But the mourning of Admiral Yi is different. It is written not on paper, but in the hearts of people, inscribed in silence rather than ink. It is a mourning that becomes memory, and memory becomes legacy. In the villages along the southern coast, fishermen tell their children that the admiral now belongs to the sea, watching over them with each tide. In the capital, scholars write of his genius, but always with a note of grief that softens their words. In the Ming court, officials speak of him as a man whose name will echo beyond borders. Even among the Japanese, where victory had long been sought in Korea, Yi Sun-sin's name becomes one spoken with a respect that crosses the boundary of defeat. It is as though his death untethers him from the limits of his life. In life, he was bound by duty, by court politics, by suspicion and betrayal. In death, he is freed to become a symbol that belongs to all who knew of him. An image of endurance, of devotion, of sacrifice. His absence becomes presence spread across nations, carried in the whisper of waves and the quiet of mourning hearts. The sea itself seems to join in the grief. On the day after the battle, the Strait of Noryang lies strangely calm, as though the waters themselves pause in respect. The smoke has cleared, the wreckage drifts quietly, and the waves move with a gentleness foreign to their usual restlessness. It is as though the sea, too, bows its head, mourning the man who gave his last breath to guard it. And yet, within the mourning, there is also strength. For grief, when shared, binds people together. The Korean people, though heartbroken, find in their loss a renewed sense of unity. The Ming allies, though far from home, feel a bond of respect that will outlast the war. Even the Japanese, carrying home the ashes of defeat, carry also the memory of an adversary who commanded not hatred but admiration. In this way, Yi Sun-sin's death becomes not only an ending but a bridge, linking people through the common language of reverence. The mourning of nations does not fade quickly. It lingers in the air, in the salt of the waves, in the silence of the court, in the whispered stories of common folk. It becomes part of history's rhythm, carried forward like the tide. His passing, though sorrowful, becomes the seed of remembrance that will flower for centuries. The sea holds his memory, the nations hold his name, and history bows its head, acknowledging that the loss of such a man is never contained by borders. Grief spreads like tidewater, uniting even those once divided by war. Yet in the hush of mourning, something remains. His words, his diary, the voice he left behind. There are some silences in history that are not empty, but full. They are filled with the rustle of paper, the scratch of ink, the weight of thoughts never meant for applause, but preserved nonetheless. Such is the silence left by Admiral Yi Sun-sin's diary, Nanjong-ilji, the war journal of the turbulent seas. Not speeches carved in stone, not proclamations shouted to the world, but a private voice, honest, unadorned, enduring. The war diary begins in the year 1592, when Korea first trembles under the sudden weight of invasion. Yi writes not as a poet seeking beauty, but as a commander keeping account, yet within his restraint lies an unintended poetry. The lines are spare, the entries often short, and yet every word carries the density of salt in seawater. Fatigue drips between the strokes of his brush. Rain fell without end today. The men are tired, provisions are scarce. But we must endure. There is no embellishment, no attempt to shape his voice into grandeur. And perhaps that is why it moves us most. He does not write for history. He writes for survival, for order in chaos, for clarity against the fog of war. Yet what survives are not simply notes, but fragments of a soul. In his pages we see the man beyond the armour, the worry for soldiers weakened by hunger, the careful reckoning of arrows and rice, the weariness of sleepless nights. He speaks of longing for home, of aching for the sight of family, and yet, again and again, his voice returns to duty, as if he has bound himself to the mast of responsibility, unable to drift toward rest. His diary is not heroic in the way legends are heroic. It is heroic in its honesty. In an age of war, where victory is often told through thunder and steel, here is a man who admits exhaustion, who fears storms, who counts every loss with sorrow. This quietness is what makes him vast. For courage is not the absence of fear or fatigue, but the act of carrying them faithfully into the next dawn. There are moments in the diary when Yi's words feel as though they are written not on paper, but on water itself. He describes the sea with the same precision he gives to military plans. Waves rise, winds shift, and in those changes he reads both danger and salvation. The sea is not backdrop, it is companion, adversary, mirror. Through his writing, we sense that he belongs as much to the water as he does to the land he defends. What lingers most, however, are the notes of loneliness. He stands at the center of fleets, yet speaks in a voice that feels utterly solitary. Burdened with betrayal by courts, stripped of rank and restored again, his diary never disguises the sting of human frailty, not just in enemies, but in allies. He writes of men who abandon him, of officials who slander, of orders from above that contradict reason. And yet he obeys, fights, perseveres. It is as though the diary holds a man caught between two tides. The chaos of politics and the steadiness of his own conscience. Centuries later, the diary remains intact, preserved in the archives of Korea. It is not embellished by later hands, it not polished into myth. It remains as he left it raw, spare, unornamented. The words speak across time not with thunder, but with the hush of tide pulling back over sand. Here, history does not shout, it whispers. And in that whisper, we hear something eternal, the humanity of a man who gave everything, yet never ceased to feel the weight of each day. Perhaps what makes the Nanjung Ilji most moving is that it was never written for us. It was not meant to be a monument, nor a tale for children to memorize. It was simply his duty to record, his habit to reflect. And yet, by surviving, it becomes something greater, the purest memory of him. The admiral we honor is not only the strategist, not only the victor of Noryang, he is also the wary hand pressing brush to paper, writing, "Supplies are low, morale is strained, I pray for strength." His words remind us that greatness does not erase humanity, it carries it. The men who shape history are not beyond longing or weariness, they are shaped by them. Yi's diary shows that true leadership is not invincibility, but endurance, to remain steady even when the self trembles. In the quiet of his lines, the world slows, We can almost see him, a lone figure in the lantern light of his cabin, the waves rocking against the hull, his brush moving steadily over paper. Outside, storms may roar, cannons may thunder. But here, on this fragile page, eternity waits. The diary is more than memory, it is an inheritance. For when nations seek models of integrity, when people ask what it means to serve beyond the self, they turn not only to his battles but to his words. The Nanjung Ilji remains one of Korea's greatest treasures, not for its beauty but for its truth. It is the mirror of a man's spirit left behind when his body could no longer endure. And so, even after his death, Yi still speaks. The war may have ended, the sea may have grown calm, but in the turning of his pages we feel again the pulse of storms, the ache of longing, the weight of duty that never faltered. His voice does not fade, it drifts on, like the tide, soft but unending. And in that tide of words, his presence lingers, gentle yet unshakable. For memory does not end with paper, it moves outward, shaping how a nation remembers itself. From diary to legend, Yi's voice now crosses into story, and story into timeless legacy. The dawn after him is pale and uncertain. The war that has consumed the peninsula for years begins to ebb, leaving behind ash, silence, and the slow, trembling breath of survival. Yet in this new light, there is no Admiral Yi Sun-sin to steady the horizon. His drum has fallen silent. His voice no longer carries across the waves. And so, the people wake to a fragile morning, one shaped by absence, yet also by the lingering strength of a man who gave his last breath to ensure that dawn would arrive. In the streets of villages once burned, children step into the daylight, their bare feet pressing into the earth that has known too much fire. Farmers bend to soil that has been torn by armies, their hands sifting through ruin in search of seeds. In port towns, fishermen untangle nets, repairing with patient fingers what war had ripped apart. Their boats creak against the tide, as though remembering battles fought where trade once thrived. Everywhere, life pushes forward hesitantly, like grass rising between broken stones. The Japanese withdrawal leaves behind more than silence. It leaves scars etched deep into the land and the people. Entire families are missing, homes reduced to embers, traditions uprooted. Yet into this void of grief comes the memory of the Admiral, not as a distant legend, but as a compass. His name is spoken not in lament, but in steadiness, a reminder that if one man could carry the weight of despair and not falter, then perhaps a people too can rise again. For years, Yi Sun-sin had been the embodiment of resistance. With his passing, Korea faces the challenge of becoming its own guardian. The sea is still there, as constant as breath, but now the people themselves must listen for its rhythm, must hear within its waves the echo of their protector's courage. No statue yet stands for him, no monument yet marks his final dawn. And yet, in the collective heart of Korea, he is already carved in memory, not in marble but in spirit. At dawn markets, merchants whisper his name as they barter fish and grain. At shrines, prayers rise for his soul, mingling with prayers for the future. In the songs of villagers, his battles find rhythm, carried across fields like threads stitching wounds. His absence does not diminish him, it transforms him. He is no longer just a man bound to a single lifetime. He becomes a constellation, distant, shining, a guide that endures. This is the paradox of loss, that in vanishing, presence deepens. Yi's death creates not emptiness, but direction. Like the North Star guiding sailors through darkness, He remains a fixed point in memory, a light by which a people can orient themselves. He is not there to command ships, yet his name steadies hands that tremble with the weight of rebuilding. Korea in these years is wary. The war with Japan had been long and bitter, dragging on for 7 relentless years. The land is scarred, its people exhausted, and yet the thought of Yi brings a strange resilience. He had carried betrayal, defeat, and injury, and yet he rose again and again. That story becomes more than history. It becomes instruction. His life whispers, "You too can endure." In the hush after war, his family mourns quietly. His sons, his nephews, his companions who rode beside him. We cannot know the full H they carried, but we know that grief, while heavy, did not break them. They bore his memory with dignity, ensuring that the story of his sacrifice did not slip into silence. The people who knew him most intimately carried their mourning like an ember, shielding it until it became flame, passed from mouth to mouth, from generation to generation, until it reached the nation as a whole. The dawn after him is not triumphant. It is tender, fragile, hesitant. But it is also a dawn made possible by his last command. Had he faltered, had he fallen without resolve, the war might have ended differently. His life was a bridge, and his death was the final plank laid across it. Now the people walk forward, trembling yet unbroken, across the bridge he built with his endurance. Time moves slowly in this dawn. Years pass. The wounds of war heal, though never fully, yet Yi's presence endures in ways subtle and profound. The fisherman who casts his net into the strait feels that the sea itself is sacred, hallowed by sacrifice. The soldier who lays down his spear remembers that courage is not in conquest, but in persistence. The child who hears the story of the admiral grows with the knowledge that greatness is not born of glory, but of service. And so, Korea's healing becomes inseparable from his memory. His absence is not a void, it is a quiet hand guiding unseen. Like a constellation in the night sky, he is not touched, but he is looked to. He becomes part of the architecture of hope, shaping the imagination of a people who refuse to bow to despair. The dawn after him is never truly without him, for though his body lies silent, his life lingers in the rhythm of the sea, in the strength of the survivors, in the steady rising of a nation that will, again and again, remember the admiral who would not yield. And as the people lift their eyes from ruin to horizon, they find him not gone, but transfigured, woven into sky and tide. From this dawn, we step toward the final remembrance, where the sea itself will cradle his legacy as if eternity were his vessel. The sea remembers what men forget. It gathers voices, fragments of cries, the fading beat of drums, and holds them in its depths. Empires rise and fall, cities crumble into dust, but the waters move with the same rhythm, carrying secrets no parchment could preserve. In the Strait of Noryang, where Admiral Yi Sun-sin gave his last breath, the sea remains the final witness. Here, the morning tide curls against the rocks as it did on that fateful dawn. Mist drifts low across the water, the same grey veil that once concealed fleets preparing for battle. Beneath the surface, the currents trace the same paths carved by keels and oars centuries ago. What men saw as victory and death, the sea received in silence. It took the wreckage of ships, the cries of sailors, the last command of an admiral, and it has held them ever since, folded into its endless motion. The sea does not commemorate with monuments of stone or words etched in tablets. Its remembrance is softer, quieter. Each wave that breaks upon the shore is an echo of the past. Each tide that rises and falls is the steady rhythm of memory refusing to fade. Noryang Strait is not only a place on a map, it is a living shrine, fluid and eternal. When we imagine Yi Sun-sin now, centuries after his death, we may think of the statues, the portraits, the written chronicles, yet those are human attempts to fix memory in permanence. The sea itself holds a memory more enduring. It remembers not in detail, but in essence the silence after thunder, the whisper of a command carried on the wind, the stillness that follows sacrifice. Those who sail these waters today may not hear it, but if they pause in the quiet of dawn, when the world is hushed and only the lap of waves against their vessel is heard, they may sense the weight of something older than themselves. The sea does not speak with words, but with presence. It whispers, "Someone once stood here, someone who did not yield, someone who poured his final breath into the tide so that others might leave." The people of Korea remember Admiral Yi in stories, in monuments, in textbooks that teach of his victories. But the sea remembers him differently. It remembers the trembling of oars, the flutter of torn sails, the shock of an arrow piercing flesh. It remembers not only the admiral, but the thousands whose sweat and blood mingled with salt water. Every drop of rain that falls into the strait joins this memory, dissolving the present into the vast continuity of the past. We often think of memory as fragile, fading with time. But in the sea, memory is cyclical. It returns again and again with each wave. Where a stone inscription weathers and erodes, the sea replenishes itself ceaselessly, carrying the same rhythm across centuries. It does not forget because it cannot. It is made of motion, of echo, of endless return. Yi Sun-sin's death could have been an ending, a silence swallowed by time. Yet because the sea remembers, his presence lingers. The strait itself becomes his grave, his altar, his eternal companion. Even when nations forget, even when wars fade into faint lines of ink in history books, the sea does not release him. He belongs to it now, as inseparable as salt from water. There is something profoundly human in this thought, that our greatest deeds and our final breaths return to nature, and nature holds them longer than memory carved by human hands. Yi's voice, in his last command, is gone to us. But perhaps in the hush of dawn, when the sea is still, that command still lingers, diffused in the mist. Advance. The sea, after all, knows endurance better than any man. It has endured storms, earthquakes, wars, the rise and fall of shores themselves. In this, it is kin to the admiral's spirit. His steadfastness and the sea's persistence are mirrors of one another. Unyielding, eternal, never silenced. Even now, when children learn his name, when visitors stand before his statues in Seoul or gaze upon relics in museums, it is not only stone or artifact that keeps him alive. It is the sea itself, carrying the living essence of his story. For when the waves strike the coast of Noryang, they strike in the rhythm of drums that once rolled across those waters. When the mist gathers, it is the same veil that once wrapped the admiral in his last battle. The sea ensures that history does not end in silence but continues as breath upon the tide. In remembering Yi, we are reminded of how fragile men are, and yet how enduring memory can be when it finds a vessel greater than stone. The sea holds his memory not as a myth preserved, but as a presence ongoing, woven into the fabric of water itself. And in that memory, the admiral does not die. He continues to sail endlessly with each tide that turns. To look upon Noryang Strait today is to see ordinary water, ordinary waves. Yet beneath that simplicity lies the invisible weight of centuries. For those willing to pause, to listen, to let the quiet seep into their bones, the sea will speak, not with thunder, but with remembrance. It will say, "Here lies a man who lived, who carried his nation upon his shoulders, who gave all he had, and who rests now in the arms of eternity." The sea remembers because it must. We remember because we choose to. Together, memory is secured, not in books alone, not in statues, but in the ceaseless rhythm of life that connects past to present, man to nature, death to continuation. And so we leave him here, not in silence, but in the endless rhythm of the sea, where memory becomes eternity. The admiral who fought his last dawn sails still, not in body, but in the whisper of waves that guide us into tomorrow. And now the waves grow calm. The drums and the clash of steel fade into stillness, leaving only the hush of the sea. Admiral Yi Sun-sin's final dawn drifts from battle into memory, from thunder into silence. His life reminds us that true strength is not found in the absence of fear, but in the quiet persistence of duty, even when the shadows deepen, and so the candle of that night burns quietly in time. Though centuries have passed, the echo of his courage still hums in the waters of Noryang. The sea remembers, and through its memory, so do we. Thank you for walking through this story with me tonight. In sharing this quiet hour, you've not only listened to history, but become part of its gentle passing from one soul to another, like a flame carried carefully from one lantern to the next. I'm deeply grateful for your presence here, for allowing these voices of the past to meet you in your own stillness. Now, let the weight of the day slip from your shoulders. You have done enough. There is nothing more to hold on to tonight. Breathe slowly, as though the tide itself were moving through you. May your dreams carry you gently like a ship on calm waters. May you find rest beneath the hush of history's lullaby. This has been the Sleeping Hourglass, a place where the past tucks you in, and where time itself softens into a whisper. If this story has brought you peace, you are always welcome to return. For now, let us leave the sea to its silence and let you drift into yours.